welcome you into another week of Scrushy on Business. My name is Dave Green. Richard Scrushy is alongside, and as you can see, it's just us. The last couple of weeks, we have had some terrific guests, different entrepreneurs in different sections of the business world. And Richard, it was great the last few weeks talking with Cody Nicholson, talking with Lamont West, and talking with Hunter Carr. Really got to hear from three different types of entrepreneurs. That was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Yeah, it really was. I'm excited about this today because it gives us a chance to answer a bunch of questions that have been building up on our emails through info@scrushionbusiness.com, but also just to kind of break out these different entrepreneurs and what they were doing. But you don't know this, Dave, but I've had some questions from a couple of people. They said, we hear all this stuff about you, Richard, and you're always talking about what you did and what you've seen, but ask Dave just to tell us a little bit about himself, and because we want to know about his entrepreneurial background. So if you could take just a couple of minutes, Dave, that'd be great.
Sure. No, absolutely. It's one of those things where management and leadership was kind of in my blood. I was very lucky at an early age to get the opportunity to do some great things in broadcasting, and was a sports talk show host in St. Louis for several years, and really enjoyed it, but also knew it wasn't my future. And so I got into management and the business side, and eventually my first entrepreneur opportunity was buying a radio station that I was working at. We were brought in to kind of save a radio station, and the company that we went to work for just didn't have any money left, and gave me an opportunity to put together a group to buy it. And I somehow raised about $3.5 million in about 60 days.
Wow.
And I mean, got thrown into the fire at a pretty young age. I was in my middle 30s at the time. And so since that time, I've pretty much been in something, whether it be my main business or a side business, where I've had my own business. And then in 2015, when I met a mutual friend of ours, Conrad Thompson, and we started a podcast network, I have pretty much been owning my own businesses since. And so we have our podcast network. We have two media properties in St. Louis, where I'm from. And our podcast network has grown into 35 different shows that we work with in a lot of different genres. And so I handle a lot of the sales responsibilities and a lot of the operational things for our companies. And we're continuing to look for more. So media has pretty much been my world most of my life.
As your radio voice is that, I mean, you've got that radio voice. I know that's important.
Yeah, it's, like I said, I was one of those people, Richard. I just worked harder than everybody else. That's all I knew how to do. And I knew from a young age what I wanted to do, of course, which is not the same, the case for a lot of people. But what really helped me is when I got my foot in the door, when I got that first internship, I let everybody there know who I was, what I wanted to do, the opportunities that I was looking for. And so I had a lot of people in media, take me under their wing, if you will, just because I was that guy who was just like, I'm not going to stop. And, you and I have gotten to know each other a bit over these last few months. And as you know, I don't stop. I work when it's time for my hobbies. I work when it's time for downtime. I like to work. That's just me.
There are a lot of people, Dave, that are like that, and I meet with especially I meet older gentlemen that are still working in their 80s, and I say, "Did you ever play golf? Did you ever do this? Did you ever do?" No, 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 no. I love working. I love working. I work every weekend. I work late at night. I do, and I understand that. A lot of people retire at 65. I can't even imagine that. And I hope I'm an encouragement to people that think they should retire at 65. I had a fella tell me not long ago. He asked me, he says, "How old are you, Richard?" And I told him, and he said, "My gosh," he said, "Why haven't you retired?" I said, "Why would I retire? I love doing what I do. I love getting up every morning, and it's just like this podcast and this interaction with you. I love talking to entrepreneurs all over the United States and different people. just exploring things, and it keeps me busy. And I mean, you could say that I am retired, which I probably am, but these are my hobbies. Like you said, your hobby is your work, and I love doing these things. So let me jump on this. What we'd like to do today is a couple of different things. First of all, actually, Dave, we've had four different entrepreneurs on. We had Billy Manovich with Simple Scrub. We had Hunter Carr on with all of his different businesses. We had Lamont Westone with all that he did, and on top of that, then we had Cody Nicholson on, and he told about his business and whatnot. And there's a common thread here, and let's just kick this around a little bit. And they're different business segments. For example, Simple Scrub is a product business, and this was where Billy Manovich saw an opportunity to make a product and sell it. So that's a totally different business. And then Hunter Carr had a service business. He saw the opportunity to do service work, for example, with Montgomery Ward, to go out and do a collections business, and he built from that. And then his other service business was the business that he did with the legal services. So that
Right.
was a service business. And eventually he got up into the healthcare. But guess what? In the healthcare business that he had, well, it was providing a service to patients. So here we have, he's kind of stuck with the whole service area. And then when you look at Lamont, he was building fences. And then he said, "Hey, wait, what am I doing?" And then he saw this opportunity in the biologics business for recurring revenue, and of course he went into that niche. And then with Cody Nicholson started out, if you remember, in the buying mobile homes, and
Right.
then home parks, and then they built that into a huge business and ended up selling that business, and I think they probably made millions of dollars. But let's kind of, there's a common thread here with something Lamont said, something that Cody Nicholson said. If you remember, Lamont went to California in the Bay Area, and he had a job working with a pharmaceutical company. And the truth of the matter is, and he's told me this kind of offline, he said he didn't believe in the product, and he didn't think the product that he was selling was very good, and he didn't really enjoy working with the organization. And so that was why he got out of that business, and then went and started the fence, came back, did the fence business where he owned his own business. He was the entrepreneur. But then he said, and he started making money on the side in the biologics business, and he saw the recurring revenue opportunity. So he said, "Why am I working so hard in the fence business when I can make more money over here doing this, and it's recurring revenue with these customers?" Well, if you go back and you take a look at what happened with Cody, Cody says, "I was in the engineer. I'm an engineer.
Right.
He had a mechanical engineer." He said, "I was building all these projects, and my paycheck didn't increase, and I was working more hours. And the guys at the top that owned the business, they had all the equity in the company. They're making a fortune." And so he said, "No, wait, something's upside down. Something's wrong about this. I need to be in my own business." And that was what he did. And of course, now today, he's moved out of the mobile home park business, and he runs a group of incubators and
Mhm.
offices, and he now is an investor, and he invests in all of these other companies where these people come, and they're students of his at Rice, or either they're people that office with him, and they're out raising money, and he sees the opportunity, and he likes the business they're in, and he likes the leadership, and he decides, I'm going to put some money in there. So he's now buying pieces of those companies, and I think he even looks at possibly even buying entire companies on occasion. So these guys have all gone about in different areas, but they're all entrepreneurs. So this kind of opens up a world of, where do you go? What do you do? So I know we got a lot of questions that we're going to jump into about each one of these, but also I'm hoping we can end up talking about five different things. And if we don't get to do it on this show, we can take it over the next show. But those five things, I wanted to just take some time and discuss each one of them. One of them is, how do we go from an idea to validation of
Right.
whatever business it is we're getting into? And then I want to talk just a moment about the right structure. Should it be an LLC? Should it be a partnership? Should it be a C corp or an S corp or what? I mean, we got to discuss that, and we got to talk about what is some people call the MVP, the minimal viable product. What is it that you're really going to sell, and what is it you're really trying to build a revenue stream around? So we want to talk a little bit about that. And then I would like to just chat some about how do you get your first customers. If you're going to build a business, you may even want to sit down and write down, here's my first 10 customers that I'm going to go after, depending on what your product is. Now, it might be like Billy Manovich, where you might be trying to sell a product and you're trying to sell it to Costco or get it into Walmart or Amazon, whatever you're doing, okay? Or it might be a service where you sit there and like Hunter Carr had that legal service. Well, he's got to look at these different big legal firms that will buy this. I mean, so it depends on who your customers are, but let's talk about that and how you would approach them. And then it wouldn't hurt to talk a little bit about funding,
Hmm.
bootstrapping versus going out and raising money, because, a lot of people they come up with a concept and then they'll spend a year just trying to get the money. I met with a group probably about 6 or 8 months ago, and they were really smart people, and they have a clinical procedure, a clinical thing. It's a medical thing, and so someone asked me because of my medical background to listen to them. They pitched the deal. I listened to the deal and I said, "What are you trying to do?" They said, "We're trying to raise $5 million." And I said, "Well, how are you going to go about doing that?" And I listened to the pitch, and the pitch was way too long. It was like 2 hours. And I said, "My man, they got to get this thing down into
Yeah.
something, where concise, where they can hit and we can." And then I kind of realized that it's possible that they don't know how to close. And they didn't. Not only was it too long, they didn't know how to bring it to a close with whoever they're talking to. So they're struggling raising the money. I don't think they've raised it yet, and they didn't really want to listen to what I had to say. So I said, okay. So, they're sitting in a room with a guy that built three companies in excess of $1 billion each, and they didn't want to listen to what I say.
They don't
Okay,
want, yeah, they
okay,
know it all.
you go find somebody else, because, and I'm not being paid to do that. I was doing it as a friendship. Somebody asked me, "Would you talk to him?" I said, "Yeah, I'll be glad to talk to him." But I saw early on that, they weren't really interested in what I had to say. So that I can't,
We ran into that same situation, Richard, not more than 3 or 4 months ago. Conrad and I were brought in really on a consulting project, and that consulting project lasted exactly an hour because
hmm
we went in for the first meeting, and the very first thing that we suggested, which was something that I would call a no-brainer. The easiest thing in the world to look at this business. I'll tell you what they did. They named themselves something that somebody else in the space was already using.
that's
So
done.
they're complete confusion, right? No
Mm.
trademarks, so they didn't have to worry about the legal end. So our first suggestion was you really need to change the name, and immediately we were told that was one thing that wasn't on the table. And
Wow.
we just were like, okay, bringing being brought into a consulting situation and being told things aren't on the table is difficult. But you're right. And when you were saying about all the guests that we've had on, a couple of them had the same thing you and I did, which I found interesting, which is we worked for these companies in the industry that we were eventually in,
Mm-hmm.
and we really listened and learned the business on their dime
Went to
before
school on them.
going out on our own.
I call it going to school on them.
Yep.
I tell young people all the time, they come to me and I say, "What have you done in the past?" And I love their idea and I love their energy and I love their entrepreneurship, but they don't have any experience that they can wrap their hands around, and they've not been out there, they've not been through the processes, they don't understand all the corporate structure, all the things you're going to have to do. And I tell them, you got to go to school on somebody, go out there and work a couple of years, watch and look how those successful companies are organized. Now you don't even have to be at the high level. You can be in a sales job, you can be in a desk job, you can be in some low level job, but you're sitting there and you're looking at all this around you and how they're running this company and these standards and these SOPs and this and this and this and all the things that they do, human resource, lawyers, accounting, learn all that, see all of that, and then experience it for a couple of years, maybe even 3 or 4 or 5 years, and watch how it works and look at all their policies and procedures and how they structure everything. Get that education. You can go to college and get an MBA and you don't get any of that. You get pieces of it
Right.
and talk some about it. And you might have a few guest people, instructors that come in. Let me tell you, I love business schools, but I spoke at a business school. You're going to get a kick out of this. I spoke at a business school back a couple of years ago, so I went to dinner with the dean of the business school, and I said, "Dean, tell me about your background." He said, "Well, I went to school here. I got my MBA here. I got my doctorate here, and then I was hired into the business school." And I've been teaching ever since. I said, "Well, how long?" He said, "I've been teaching 27 years here." I said, "Have you ever run a business?" He said, "No." I said, have you ever
Of
made a
course not.
payroll? He said, no. I said, so you got an MBA and now you're the dean and you're running the whole thing. And I'm not being critical. I mean, the guy was very smart. Don't get me
Yeah,
wrong. And he was
but I
probably an
understand where you're
administrator,
going.
but he never run a business. And I'm just saying, how do you teach somebody what you and I have had to go through, beating our head against, trying to get, one of the things I wanted to talk about here was how do you get the customers? If you've never gone out and had to go through that, and I know one of the questions that we got is that we're going to talk about here is, what do you tell somebody when they fail and they fail and they fail? How do
Hmm.
they get up, keep going? And they got a great concept, but people are going to tell you, I'm not interested, and you're going to have to find a way to get them interested. So one of the things out of the five things I wanted to talk about was pitching to investors. What do you not say? What do you say? How do you make sure you say the right thing? So when you met with those guys, you and Conrad, and you suggested you can't use that name. If somebody else has got the name, you knew that it was not going to go very far, didn't you?
That's it. You just, you know people who are listeners and people who are talkers, right?
Hmm.
They're just, as you were talking about that scenario of being a salesperson and still being able to learn the company, see how your fellow, the people who work with you, see how they react to certain things put out by management, right? Listen to what
Exactly.
they say about the company. There's so many things that you can learn if you're listening and if you're paying attention. And I want to pivot to one of the questions we got about Cody's visit. This came from
Yeah.
Cindy in Rochester. Have you heard the term the Great Resignation?
The Great Resignation.
Yes, that is the term that is being used now for the baby boomers who own businesses who are getting ready to either sell or close their businesses or obviously give it to the next generation.
Hmm.
And so Cindy's question was, do you think more entrepreneurs should be looking at buying existing businesses instead of always trying to start from scratch? And she was referring to some of the things Cody said about the different businesses that they look at. You're going to have a lot of businesses available that have been running, that have cash flow, that have a customer base. So while we talk a lot about starting from scratch, what do you think about Cindy's question of should people look at more existing businesses?
That sounds like a simple question, but that is extremely deep, and I
Mm.
could I could do 2 hours on that. And let me tell you why. It depends on the business, and it depends on your passion. All right, give you an example. So Cody goes out. I mean, there's mobile parks. Mobile home parks are. I mean, they're everywhere. And he
Everywhere.
goes out and builds a couple $100 million revenue stream in mobile home parks and sells it, and they make a lot of money. That business has been around a long time. It's a great business. People have to have homes. They're inexpensive. They're they're temporary. They work extremely well, and they will always be around. It's like somebody telling me, I had an entrepreneur tell me one time that is a lady, and she was building the most beautiful oak cabinets, bookshelves, and things like that. They were all. And I looked at them, and she was, and they were unbelievable. And I mean, selling for like $1,500, and I mean, they were sturdy, they were great. And she asked me what I thought about it, and I said, well, people are always going to buy furniture. I mean, everybody's got to have furniture, so there's always going to be a market. Now, if your product is better than what for the money, the same amount of money, and you got a better product, and it'll serve that customer well, the chances are you can probably sell yours up and above that. But here's the question I asked her. I said, distribution. I said, you're one person out here in the middle of nowhere building these beautiful cabinets. You got them all in this warehouse, but how are you going to get them out into people's homes? How are you going to display them? How are you going to get them distributed? You've got to have the ability to move the product, and you got to move volume in order to build it into a profitable business. The business didn't make it, Dave. It didn't make it. And it didn't make it not because it wasn't a good product. It didn't make it because the entrepreneur never understood the distribution and didn't have the money to hire the people to go out and help put it together or hire the people that knew how to put distribution together. But so let's think now that didn't answer your question. Let's get back to buying business. I'm all about buying businesses. Look, let me tell you again, we talked about McDonald's. Ray Kroc, he bought McDonald's. They had been in business 14, 15 years. but they were just one store. He
Yeah.
bought it and he figured out how to franchise it worldwide. Well, they got 36,000 stores or 100,000 or whatever it is. I don't even know, but it's all over the world. So I think that if you have a passion for a business, just like Ray went in and he was fascinated by the ability to make the hamburgers and the French fries and do it in such an efficient and quick way. He said,
Hmm.
"Oh my gosh, this is a business. I can build this everywhere." It's just like there's been coffee shops forever, but look what Starbucks built. An incredible network. And of course, they had to mix some things and change some things up. But every day I drive by a Starbucks and there's a line of cars out there going through the drive through. And I'm like,
Yes.
what in the world? And they're paying $5, $6, $7 for a little cup of coffee. But people do it. And so they're selling something that people want. And so I think it depends on what it is you're doing, number one. What is the business and how much does it cost to get into it? What is the return going to be? And you know, we talk about Me Too businesses and first out of the box businesses. Let me tell you, there are some businesses that I would not buy because I do not believe that those businesses can become national companies or become even regional. And one of the things that I like to look at when I look at buying a business is that business, how big can it be? And can you build it into multiple locations? Or can you, if it's going to be just one location and that's going to be it, and it's got all the support to make that successful, okay, that's fine. But do I want to put what precious time that we have? You know, we only have so many hours and so many minutes in a day. Am I going to put that into that business if that business is only making $100,000 a year profit? Or 200,000, or would I rather put it into a business that could make $5 million a year profit? So it really depends on you as the individual, where you live, what you're passionate about, because in order for a business to be successful, you've got to be passionate. And you know, I have to say this: there was a business that my family had been supporting. We've been supporting that business. We loved it. We would go there, and I'll just tell you, it was a restaurant. Well, some reason they quit managing that place right. They put in a new manager, and the manager that was running it day to day, it was jam up, man. I mean, service was like that, food was good, everything was great, and there was an attitude. People were smiling. They're not smiling over there now.
Mm.
It's like they're mad at the world. You go in there and everybody's mad, and they're just like, hey, could you take my order? And you know, I mean, could you give me another glass of tea here? I mean, I've been waiting for 30 minutes. Something went wrong. And I don't know if the guy who owns it pulled his attention off of it, put in the wrong person to run it. And I've even heard that some of the employees are going to leave because they do not like the new store manager. Now, it depends on what you want to do. I do like buying businesses. Yes. I like buying businesses that you can build. Remember, I think in one of the first episodes we had, I talked about a chicken business. I went into a little chicken
Right.
business. They had 5 restaurants, and they had the best chicken, and it was fantastic. And so, my family, some of my family members, and I got together and said we need to franchise that business. They didn't want to sell us the stores. We said that's fine. Just let us franchise exactly what you're doing. We like the sauce, we like the taste of the chicken and everything, and they wouldn't let us do it. They still have, I don't think they have more than 5 stores. They never did it. It would have been a great business. And now you have so many other chicken businesses that are competitive because this 25 years ago. And it is a great business. Now, so I believe that you will come across specific opportunities, yes, that are worth buying. Now, here, what is the return? What do you have to pay for it? Are you know, when you start, are you just going to franchise it and let them keep and own that business, or are you going to possibly, um, buy the whole business? I mean, what are you going to pay them for it? What is the return going to be? Can you do owner financing? That's one thing about buying a business now. We can talk about that. If they're willing to do owner financing, that's always very, very sweet. So you don't have to go out and raise equity. You
Right.
can buy into the business. You can take it over, and you will find, Dave. And I don't want to talk too much. I know you got some things to say about it, but listen, there you will find people that are now ready to get out of the business, like you just said. They'll do owner financing. And that's many times they will. They'll say, look, if you'll just take it over and run it and grow it and whatnot, you can pay me out over 5 years or 10 years and give me 30% of the profit or whatever and do owner financing. Those are great ways to buy existing businesses. So, yes, I am a supporter of buying existing businesses, but it depends on your passion. It depends on location. It depends on opportunity to expand the business. It depends on how much you have to pay for it and how you finance it. And all of those things are important.
Yeah, all very important, and obviously doing your due diligence and homework on the business to find out. You mentioned restaurants. There's a restaurant for sale here in our area, and I spoke with the gentleman who was selling it not too long ago, and he was giving me all the reasons why it's a great purchase for someone. But here's the secret, Richard, about that business. He is the reason that that business does well.
Come on.
He's
That's
the
it.
head manager.
Yep. I believe that.
He's he's the head chef, right?
Sure.
So when
Sure.
he leaves, you're left with, maybe his recipes and a customer base that I'd be afraid would be would be upset when he's no longer there. So you have to do your homework. I have a friend who was investigating a business not that long ago, and they took him on a tour through the facility. And when they were in the business office, they introduced him to their accountant, their assistant accountant, and their part-time accountant.
Mm,
And he just sort of turned to his partner and, with a little smile, and you know what that is, which is,
mm,
business people have a tendency sometimes you stop thinking about it being a business, right?
mhm.
Those three people, I'm sure the business owners, care very much about and don't want to let them go. But of course, my buddy looked at his friend and thought to himself, what in the world would you need three accountants in house for?
Really?
So there's a lot of things that you can learn, but it all goes back to the same thing: homework,
Yeah.
asking questions, listening to find out. Because as I said, there's going to be some very, very good opportunities because it doesn't seem like the next generation wants to work quite as hard as the way mom and dad or grandma and grandpa did. I'm just saying.
Yep, yep. Well, I think more along the lines of the really where it takes a lot of muscle. That's where we're seeing the weakness. And it's almost like we have, I know that my children have had things that I didn't have when I was looking at, where they were at 16, 17, 18 and, going to college opportunities and things. And I paid my way through college. I worked full-time job and I paid my own way. My parents did not pay for me to go to college. And I didn't have a scholarship. I paid for it. I did have a government loan of which I had to pay
Yeah,
back.
me
And
too.
that I paid for every quarter. And, and I had to work and I bought my first car when I was working, at restaurants and doing, working for a brick mason and working as a janitor at night. And so I did, I had to pay for things myself. And if I wanted it, when I was 16, my parents did not buy me a car. I know that's hard to believe, but they didn't. And so when I got a car, it was something that I had to pay for.
Yeah.
So, and so, it's a different work ethic. And I think that's what you're trying to say. A little bit different work ethic these days.
Yes, just a little bit, but let's get into some more questions. This one relates to our visit with Lamont West. Bill in Paducah wrote in and he said, Richard, how do you balance immediate profit needs with the long-term vision of leaving something for the next generation? So Lamont talked about that, Cody talked about that, and we've talked about it before of the idea that you did when you started Health South, which is you were thinking a lot about the long term future of the company because you were preparing yourself to go public before you really ever even got started. It's hard to do, but a lot of it goes back to thinking of these things up front, doesn't it?
It does. And, appropriately reinvesting, the profits into additional revenue generators. Uh, I was very careful to buy properties that were revenue generators that would produce residual revenues for many, many years to come. And what's interesting is, I started that company in January of 1984. Now, if you add up the years, you'll see that this company has been around 51 years. I mean, you start thinking about that. Is it 51 years? I see 84 to, no, not quite.
No, 40. Yeah, it'd be
40,
41.
41. Anyway, start thinking about that. Um, so we did think, and they still have the first hospitals we ever bought. They still run them. They're still out there. Many of the facilities we bought, they were long-term investments, and they paid for themselves 100 times over by now, and they continue to produce and produce and produce. So we did some things. We put money back in and reinvested in the company so to be around a long time. And yeah, that's a smart way to do it. And like you said, don't try to take it all out in the first 5 years, leave something for the future. So those people that are working at that company right now are receiving their salaries and their income, and they get their stock options and the stock value and all. It's being produced off of the backs of those of us that built it back in the 80s.
Right.
We went out, we worked hard to go out and find the land and build the hospitals and, or in some cases, buy the hospitals. I drive by hospitals all over the United States that I negotiated the deal to buy. I see them all the time in cities that I go to. If I go to your city right now, I can drive by hospitals that I built in in St. Louis, and I built them 25 years ago, and they're still producing revenue. I did joint ventures with universities all over this country, even in Puerto Rico. I did a joint venture with the University of Puerto Rico down in San Juan. But you can go all over the country, and I see where I built hospital here and hospital there. Those hospitals are still up and running. There are multiple hospitals in Houston that I built. They're all generating revenue, and they're paying salaries of tens of thousands of people across America right now that are working for that company because of the things that I did 30 years ago, 40 years ago.
Hmm.
And of course nobody wants to give you any credit for any of that, but the bottom line is the guy at the top that made 9 or 10 million dollars last year as CEO, he's sitting on top of the hospitals that are generating the revenue that I built. And he wasn't the entrepreneur. He didn't have a vision. Matter of fact, he was hired as just an operating employee, I think a regional manager level or administrator of a hospital. But it wasn't his company. He didn't make an investment in the company, and he didn't have the vision. So somebody, I tell people all the time, when you drive through a city like St. Louis, and I love driving through St. Louis because I love the arch and the Mississippi River. Okay, I really do. And I lived there for a year, many,
Yeah.
many years. 1979, I was living in St. Louis. But when you drive through St. Louis and you see those great big tall buildings downtown, I am telling you right now, there's an entrepreneur behind every one of them. Somebody had to take the risk. Somebody had to have the vision. Somebody had to step out, whether they were working for a company and said, I'm going to take the risk to build this, this huge 100,000 square foot building for office building for us, or that was a risk. And somebody had to take that. So, I look at people that take risk. I look at entrepreneurs and people that have a vision, and, I look at these things, and I mean, I'm impressed by them, and I respect that. But I don't have as much respect for somebody that just got a job on the backs of some other entrepreneur who put his own money in it, built it, invested in it, and made it very successful. And then some individual just draws a salary at the top, makes millions of dollars just for sitting on top of it, but he never had a creative idea in his life. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that going on. And I'm not just talking about my previous company. I'm talking about lots of other companies where
Yes.
the entrepreneurs have passed on. They're not alive now. They moved on and left it to somebody else. And some of those companies don't do quite as well once the original entrepreneur is gone.
Let's go to a question that we have from a listener who wrote in and asked. Jessica in Kalamazoo was the one who asked the question. Do you believe residual income streams are essential for every entrepreneur, or can a single focused business be enough? This came from our visit with Lamont West.
Well, I think the answer to that is it depends on the individual, doesn't it? Depends on what you know how to do and what you enjoy doing. I the concept that Lamont had, building fences, he enjoyed it there for a while until he had that residual income stream set up with the biologics company, and then he said, "Hey, this is much easier for me, and I'm going to do this versus having to do a project and get paid and a project and get paid." But there are a lot of people that build houses and do renovations, and do all kinds of different projects, and they like that business, project to project to project, and they enjoy it, and they enjoy the satisfaction of completing a project. So, not only just building it, but then having the completion of it. So, and I know a lot of people that do that, and they love it. But but if you can build something, and then that something you built gives you a revenue stream, recurring revenue or residual revenue for years to come, boy, that's a home run. So I think it depends on the individual and your skill set. Now, you take a guy who is a framer, okay, who can frame houses. That's an incredible talent, and that's something he can do over and over and over and over and make a really good living at it. And I know some brilliant framers, and I got to hand it to them. Same thing for a guy who's a roofer, or people that install air conditioning systems, HVAC systems. They do have some residual on that, especially on maintenance contracts and different things. But it really depends on the individual, what you're passionate about, what you like to do, what your skill set is. So I say that is something that is specific to the individual entrepreneur.
John in Pittsburgh wrote in info at scrushyonbusiness.com. He wrote in after listening to our interview last week with Cody Nicholson, which I strongly suggest that you check out if you have not already. Cody gave some good advice, Richard, about pitching to venture capitalists. And you've talked about this before and talked about it a little earlier in the episode. But what are the biggest mistakes you would say you see when you've been pitched opportunities, or when you've talked to your friends and others about opportunities that they've heard? What's the biggest mistake people make in those presentations?
And that's a pretty simple question. The biggest mistake is not being prepared, not having your ducks in a row, not having all of the information. You get one shot sometimes. You go in front of look, these people are busy, especially somebody manages a fund that's 100 million or 200 million or even a billion. They're managing, or maybe it's just 50 million, but they're busy people. They're managing a fund. They have a lot going on. They're going to give you a shot. They're going to make a decision whether or not they're going to put their money on this racehorse, on your deal, on you, on the people you bring to the table. You got to have it all laid out. You got to have it all put together. It's not going to go in and say, well, I'm thinking about doing this, and we probably can make some good money on it. That's not going to go. No, you go in. You have your best suit on, you look sharp, you got your hair fixed, you bring your best people with you, you have a dynamite PowerPoint presentation or handout, whatever, but will you be ready to present? You're going to need to get into details with who's our customer base, what's and how many of these are we going to build, and what is it going to cost, and what is the return on those. And you're going to need 3 to 5 years. I like 5 years. Just give them 5 years of numbers, project it on out, show them what the returns are going to be. Now, keep in mind, in some of the previous shows we talked about, the venture capital is looking for a minimum of 5 to 6 times his money in 5 to 6 years. And that's what he wants. And I actually would like to have 20 times his money. And some of the early on investors in startup businesses, they make 20 times. I had some investors made 20 times on some deals that I did. But I think if you can show them that they can make 5 to 6 times their money in 5 to 6 years, you're going to be in a good shape. But you want to come in, you want to stand up straight, you want to present, you want to have your best suit on, you want to be sharp, you want to have. And let me tell you, I tell people, make that presentation to family members, to friends, to anybody you can. Go over it and go over it and go over it, so that when you get in there, you're smooth. You're just like this with it. You're not stumbling around. And maybe they'll also show you some shortfalls. Well, what about this? What about that? You didn't add that in. You ought to add this in. Let me tell you something else too. They're not typically interested in something that's going to be small. You're going to need to show, can I take this business and can it become a nationwide or an international business? I mean, how far can you take it? And do you have a skill set to be able to manage it? Are you just a visionary? Or are you going to be the operator as well, the manager? You've got to have your act together. And they're going to ask you about the people you're hiring, who's going to be with you. If you go in there and you got 3 family members, and me and my brother, my sister, and my cousin, we're going to run this thing, it's probably not going to go very far. I'm telling you right now, they're going to want to see that there's some, that you've got people around you that you can trust, that can help you, and that can help. Like if you're going to have a financial guy, have a good one. If you're going to have a sales guy, have a good one. If you're going to bring in, development person, or you're going to bring in an HR person, whoever you bring in with you, bring in another operator, maybe a chief operating officer. Have your act together. They're going to ask you a lot of questions, and you're going to be able to show returns. You're going to have to show how much money it's going to take. Are you going to be able to do it with the initial amount of money that you're raising? When you pitch to a venture capitalist, don't ask for too much, but don't ask for too little,
Mm.
and be able to show them. And one of the shows, Dave, we talked about milestones. You can go in there and you can say, here's my first milestone. We're going to accomplish this, and it's going to take this much money. And then we're going to go do this, and it's going to take this much money. And then here we're going to do this. And if it's going to take 2 years to get into profitability, and then the third year you say we're going to be able to make it this much, and this is why, and explain it all out. If you can present it well and you can explain it, and they can see how they're going to make money and how they're going to get their return, chances are you're going to be able to do that. Also, they like to know, what is your exit strategy? If you go in there and you say, well, I just want to work a few more years, 2 or 3 years, and then I probably won't sell the business. That's not going to turn them on. No, they want to know that you are committed. You're going to get in there. You're going to take whatever it takes, do whatever it takes to build it. You're going to work 24/7. If you go in and say, I'm going to work Monday through Friday. I like my weekends off because I like to go fishing. Well, that's probably not going to get you where you
Keep
want to go.
fishing.
To keep fishing. And if you get in there and you say anything stupid like that, it's going to work against you, and they're going to remember that. Commitment. Now, let me tell you something they look for. They look for someone who can articulate the business. If you're going to be in the leader, you're the visionary, and you're the guy that knows that you need to be able to articulate what you're trying to commit. What you're trying to build, and they need to, and they're going to ask you some tough questions. And we can do a whole session here sometime in the future, an episode where we just talk about the questions they're going to ask you and how you need to be prepared. There are a lot of people out there that have been through this, and they know exactly what I'm talking about. And some of the guys are harder than others, and there'll be some trick questions, and they'll set you up, and you better be able to know when they're setting you up, and really. But if you know your product, your customers, your cost, you understand the returns, you understand what you can and can't do and what it's going to take to build it, and you can present that and communicate that appropriately, chances are you'll probably raise your money. But another thing too, they're not interested in just any and every business. They look for businesses that are maybe something unique. If you're going to be doing something that's already, it's a Me Too business, you better be able to show why yours is different and show why they should invest in yours and not go invest in somebody else's. So these are things. A lot of times it's the difference in the management team. And maybe there's something that's a little different in your product that makes it better than the other guy down the street that might be doing the same thing. And if you have something that's really unique and is brand new and nobody's ever done it, and you can show how that is going to change an industry or open up a new industry or do something really special, chances are you're going to get that funding if you can present that appropriately and you surround yourself with a management team that is qualified. And that's something that we can talk about too as we go forward. You have another question there, Dave?
Well, I wanted to turn it over to you because you brought up at the beginning of our episode some things that you wanted to mention as 5 things that we want to talk about as it relates to entrepreneurs and pitfalls. So I wanted to give you some time to
Yep.
sort of go over those points because it's information like this that I think our listeners truly appreciate and why people are tuning into the show. So we appreciate them doing that. Hopefully they'll like this video and have already subscribed, but if not, hit the subscription button and hit that bell so you get those news alerts that new content from Scrushy on business is there. But Richard, tell us about those 5 points.
Well, yeah, there are 5 points that we want to spend some time on. We don't have time today in this episode, but over a period of time, we're going to cover these and many more. I have about 20 points that I want to cover, but the first 5 I think that are important for anyone out there that's thinking about starting a business or building a business, or you already started it and you're trying to grow it. We're talking about idea to validation. We want to make sure that before you go spend a bunch of money and a bunch of time, that we have fully validated, what it is you're going to do. And from your idea, your vision, your concept, your dream, to some kind of reasonable validation. And that validation includes, how big can it be and what is it going to cost to do it? So these are things that we're going to want to talk about. So, but we have to talk about structure as well. What is your end goal? Is this something you're going to build? You think it's going to be a public company? You just want to be a private company? You and some friends, or you and your family, and you don't want to be, a national company. You don't want the exposure of dealing with the SEC and all of that. So let's talk about how you set that up. Whether it's an LLC, is it a partnership you put together? Or you just need an S corp for yourself? So you got the corporation, but you want to get the tax benefit. You do an S corp, or is it a C corp because you're thinking about you may one day see it as a public company, or you want to be able to sell shares in your company. So we'll talk about that, and then in that process, we talked about an MVP, which is really is your minimal a viable product. What is it? And let's get focused on what is we have. If we can't explain our product, cost associated with it, and how we're going to sell it, then we're in trouble. We got to be able to have those things and understand them. We're talking about also putting together a list of customers and why. What are our customers? Who are our customers? Being able to fully understand who the customer is and who's going to buy or who's going to use the product, and how you're going to price that. So I always like to say, give me your top 10 customers. Tell me who they are. If I'm having a one-on-one, and we have the time to discuss that. And then we also want to talk about, because there's a lot of companies are going to be bootstrapped. You're going to bootstrap them. I'm working with, I talk to people every day that are out there bootstrapping, just trying to get enough money to just get the door open and get it going. And then once they get traction and it starts to build, they will go out and then try to raise funds, because they'll be able to say, look, this is what we've accomplished. We've got traction here. We're moving product. Now we want to expand it. We're going to improve our manufacturing process. We're going to have to improve our distribution. We're going to need warehouse space. I'm going to have to hire more people. I got marketing expense. So now we're out here fundraising. So we got to talk about that. And then also the last thing, which is number 5, is pitching to investors. And that's kind of what we were talking about with the venture capitalists. But it includes also if you did we're trying to take a company public. So pitch into angel investors, pitch into wherever you may be trying to raise money. How do you pitch it? How do making sure that when you pitch it, you say all the right things, you do all the right things, and you've got all the right information when you go in front of that investor. So those 5 things we want to talk about. We've had 4 really great entrepreneurs on the show. We have others that will come on. And today I kind of put some of those off because, Dave, I wanted to chat about some of these things. And I feel like sometimes you just got to stop and say, okay, we had these 4 different people on. They gave out great information. They were a lot of fun. They were entertaining. They've been successful. They were able to share their stories. But now let's just talk a little bit about what they did and how they did it and why they were successful. And there was a unique trait amongst all of them, and they are all workaholics. Just like you and I were talking, we enjoy the work, and all 4 of those individuals enjoy what they do. As a matter of fact, their hobby is kind of their work, just like you said, right?
Yep. Nope. That's absolutely it. And put in the work, right? And continue to put in the work, as all of them, of course, are still entrepreneurs to this day, and continuing to build businesses. So a lot you can learn from them, and you can, of course, check out all of our previous episodes. You can follow us on Spotify, Apple, and all major podcast outlets. And of course, subscribe to the YouTube channel here. If you have a question you'd like to ask Richard Scrushy, you can email in info@scrushionbusiness.com. And we're here each week with Scrushy on Business. And Richard, I'll let you have the final word and close us out for this week.
Hey, Dave, I told you the story back when we first got started about the guy who came to me, and he had a business degree. He said he wanted to get into management because he wanted something easy. And I said, no, 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 you don't understand about management. Of course, that guy was not very successful. Okay. So I want to leave with this. We really appreciate you watching the show. There's some great dreamers out there. There's some great entrepreneurs. There's some young people out there that are trying to make a decision, just like Lamont made, just like, Hunter made, just like Cody made, when they transitioned from a job to a business owner, and they began to then enjoy and use that entrepreneurial spirit that God gave them as a gift. So for those of you that are fall into that, please keep watching our show. We're going to keep feeding you information and talking about things that I think will interest you. And we do appreciate your subscription as well, and viewing our shows. So you have a blessed day.
Everybody have a great week, and we will see you next week on Scrushy on Business.